when Maya asked me to do this, she actually apologized for the fact that it was late and very short notice, but I just really grabbed it because I kind of know the noise that's ringing in our ears about what's happening and the need to actually create some sense with this. So I'm looking around and wondering how many of us would have actually turned up if the situation did not warrant legal requirements and changes in our schools as well. I'm going to start with sharing something that happened a couple of weeks ago, and I was invited to a class which had 6th and 7th graders, and boys and girls. And this was to do with safety issues in school and what they thought about it and things like that. So when I asked them, how many of you feel safe in this school and are you feeling safe in your school, all hands went up without a pause. And they put them down, and then I asked, how many of you have been bullied, made fun of, spoken of an idea and felt that it wasn't valued? And I had at least 80% of hands go up again. Okay? And the reflection from that was the sense that in all our minds, and I think a lot of the media discussions, parent discussions that are happening at home, the sense is that safety is being narrowly understood as an absence of physical harm by a stranger. That seems to locate the kind of arguments or discussions that we seem to be having in our schools, in our homes, and so on. And it really took a while for students to understand that that danger was not necessarily from a stranger and outside of your school or your home. It's very much located within. More than half, a little more than half of cases that involve sexual abuse and molestation, the person who has actually had that happen is somebody that is known to the victim. My focus there, in the brief time that we have, is to look at shifting our conversations from this crisis intervention mode that we seem to have wrapped ourselves in, to looking at how we can proactively engage with broader dimensions of school safety. My focus is also to move the issue of school safety from legal talk and guidelines to putting it on the top of an educational agenda. That is really also why I'm looking at, presenting some information to you. To me, a fundamental requirement for schools is for it to be a safe and welcoming place where children can learn and thrive. I think if we work under that overarching theme, a lot of what we have to discuss gets sorted under that. Right now, I know, topmost in a lot of your minds are the guidelines that have been issued by the Department of Public Instruction. We have the police getting involved. You also have the POSCO Act, which is the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. So we're working with a lot of legalese right now and looking at what needs to be put into place. And at the end of this month is the deadline that the Department of Public Instruction and the police departments have put into place for schools to comply with the guidelines they've issued. So it would be interesting to see what happens once that deadline has passed and where are we with what is real. Starting with our recognition of what is unsafe. A simple thing like getting into a fight, a teacher throwing a book out of class, high levels of conflict, bullying, use of sarcasm, all of those in schools also constitute unsafe environments. And I would want for our discussion to include these aspects as well, and they are to me as important as what we're discussing in the media. When we look at why we're making such a big deal of safe schools and unsafe schools, I just thought from the perspective of research in neuroscience, it would just be helpful for us to understand why should we be concerned as educators about creating safe schools in the first place? Which leads to the question, how does an unsafe school impact a child? Children perceive threat and process threat and anxiety in very different manners from how adults do. They have a very personalized understanding of threat, something that is not safe for them. They have limited frameworks of understanding how they are to relegate meaning to what is actually happening in their worlds. What neuroscience is telling us is that when a child or children continue to experience threat, and threat can be of different forms. It could be me coming into class and finding that I don't have a place to sit. It could be a student finding that his lunchbox is going missing for 2 weeks in a row. A child who has to face a teacher's sarcasm day in and day out. A messy classroom, dirty bathrooms, all of these constitute unsafe environments. Children's brains and brain circuitry at this point in time is being hardwired, and it is extremely vulnerable to environmental influences. So what you do in the classroom or what you don't do is actually involved in the hardwiring of some child's brain. And I think sometimes that's a scary thought, and I think it's also something that you hold on to when you recognize how important what it is that you're doing in the classroom. Circuits in the brain are very, very vulnerable to threat and repeated threat. So when there are dysfunctions, it sets the stage for a lifetime of dysfunction. So you're setting the stage for more complicated conditions like anxiety, for depression, for various physical health disorders that are also coming through. What the body also releases are high levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And this in turn affects immunity. It also damages areas of the brain that are involved in memory and learning. And what is the fallout then of all of this? At a neurological level, these are things that you can't see as an educator. But what you can see very, very clearly are behaviors that the child is displaying. A sense of not being able to change or alter certain things in their environment, which creates a sense of helplessness, hopelessness, a sense of shutting down, a sense of low motivation, and then begin to see dips in learning, in attention, and in how they are participating in things around them. If I were to be specific, some of them would be internalizing conditions, what we refer to in child psychiatry as internalizing. So these would be conditions like depression, anxiety, mood-related disorders, eating-related disorders, and so on. You could also have externalizing disorders, where you could have children who were getting aggressive. There's a high level of conflict that's happening between peers. There's vandalism that's happening in schools, and a complete breakdown in terms of hierarchical structures. If we recognize that the bottom line is that learning does not exist in a vacuum. There are emotions that govern how effective that learning actually is. And if we paid attention only to one physical aspect, then we seem to forget that there are these larger issues that happen on a day-to-day basis that never really get addressed. So I'm hoping that in the discussions that happen, the recognition is that school safety is not just about how many CCTVs you can put in how many places and have X amount of floor vigilance officers sitting behind some plastic cubicles. It isn't that. School safety is not about control. If, on the other hand, if your discussions center around what conditions allow for students in my school to feel safe, what conditions allow for students to thrive, for learning to thrive in my school, we are then actually making a step forward with the kind of debate that needs to be had. Positive school climate and culture is a big prerequisite for a safe school. The sense that if we are able to regard our students with a certain level of sensitivity, not just our students but our staff as well, that students and staff begin to feel accepted and included in all the activities that are happening in school. We have a curriculum, more importantly, that supports the development of social and emotional skills. A lot of what we're doing seems to be knee-jerk reactions, responses to a crisis that has already happened. But if you're looking at how we strengthen resources within schools, then you are looking at more thought out and rigorous ways in which we address it. And I do believe the way forward is a systematic curriculum and one that looks at how we develop social and emotional skills. And also an area of research that the Teacher Foundation is engaged with currently. I do believe that we need to have clear boundaries and expectations in schools as well. That responses and consequences are timely and they're focused on behavior and not necessarily on the student. That schools have clear response plans, very clear crisis response plans, that children know who to access, what the procedures are when something happens that should not happen in a school setting. A safe school is also a school that fosters family involvement, is one that allows for some amount of openness in bringing parents in and having conversations. It's also a safe school if, especially now, you understand the legal considerations under which you are going to be governed over and beyond what we recognize as creating safety mechanisms in terms of physical safety mechanisms. We look at broader aspects of safety and we begin to pursue the fact that we need to work with social and emotional skills in our schools. Thank you.